Today's topic is a case which falls in the category of preview of coming attractions. I'm always talking about the coming movie attractions and all this, and this field, the coming attractions, are cases that are coming up for decision at some time in the future. And this is down the road a bit. But it's an important topic and an interesting one. The topic is grandparent visitation. And what happened is on May 8th, the Court of Appeals certified an appeal to the Wisconsin Supreme Court. The case is called In Re Paternity of A.A.L. I don't know how quite it's cited, but I think it's Michaels, M-I-C-H-E-L-S, versus Lyons, L-Y-O-N-S. And it's 2017 AP 1142. And what it is a case involving grandparents' rights and grandparents' ability to petition to be able to see their grandchildren against the wishes of the child's parents. It's one of the few issues in which the law is driven by a U.S. Supreme Court decision. In this field, it's rare enough we get Wisconsin Supreme Court decisions. It's extremely rare that we get one from the U.S. Supreme Court. And a number of years ago, the United States Supreme Court decided a case called Troxell versus Granville. And Troxell dealt with the constitutionality of allowing courts to make orders regarding visitation when there are fit parents. So we're not dealing with circumstances in which there are highly dysfunctional parents or children at risk, but either in intact families or, as in this case from the Wisconsin Court of Appeals and certification, parents that weren't married to each other but yet are aligned in terms of whether or not grandparents should be involved. Troxell's a complicated case because there's something like 5 or 6 different opinions in the case out of 9 justices. So you sort of have to add up what holding 5 of them seem to agree to. But at least 6 of them, as I recall, certainly a majority of the U.S. Supreme Court, held in Troxell that trial courts should not interfere on a constitutional basis with the decisions of fit parents. And it seems to make a lot of sense in a way, but yet your heart goes out a lot of times towards grandparents who are deprived of being able to see their children. Or maybe it's just me now that I'm into the grandparent business, and it's great and it's a lot of fun. Not just for the grandparents, it's great for the grandchildren. First of all, it's they get spoiled a bit without being spoiled all the time. There are also financial resources available. Good grandparents, as we have done, immediately started putting money aside for our grandchildren's college fund, help buy them things when they're are younger, and certainly not primary source of support, but help out there a bit too. And I don't know about teaching or the grandchildren things or helping them in that regard at all, but certainly it's a possibility and something that could happen. And I heard a line once that went that no child has ever been hurt by having too many people to love that child. And without trying to sound too saccharine, love's a good thing. And if grandparents want to add love into a child's life, that seems to be a good thing. The other side of the argument, though, is a very practical one, which, imagine this scenario, which is by no means impossible. Let's assume that their child has 4 living grandparents, and assume for a moment that both sets of grandparents are divorced, and let's assume for a moment that all 4 grandparents are either remarried or want to have visitation. Not likely, but it's certainly possible, and they all want a weekend. Well, you know what? We're going to run out of weekends real soon for this intact family, or even not intact family, even worse, if we have parents like in this case who are not married to each other, we're not married to each other, and they each have separate weekends, we're going to run out of weekends real quick here. And there's a limited amount of time to go around. And there is the slippery slope issue as well, which is if we start saying, okay, well, we're going to recognize the right of grandparents to have a placement of their children. Well, there are other people that could have very close relationship with the children. Adult step siblings come to mind, very common in today's world. Aunts and uncles that may have served in the role of parenting children can come around. And where do we end this? And if we keep dividing up the child, it's going to get real complicated of where this child spends time and with which parent or which grandparent or which step sibling or whatever, and where do we draw the line in this? I spoke on this to the family court judges a number of years ago in terms of the issues and the difficulties involved and making a decision. And I said, one of the problems, judges, and I said, how many of you relate to the following story? It's an old Jewish story of two men going to a rabbi to ask him to arbitrate a dispute. And the first one tells his story to the rabbi, and the rabbi scratches his beard and says, you know what, son, you're right. And one says, Rabbi, wait, you haven't heard my side of the story. The rabbi says, oh, go ahead, my son. And the second one explains his story, and the rabbi scratches his beard and says, you know what, you're right. And there's this pause, and the rabbi's assistant pulls the rabbi's sleeve and says, Rabbi, they can't both be right. And the rabbi says to him, you know something? You're right too. And that's where judges are in these cases. And I told that story and all the judges in the room laughed. I said, you're in a case where nobody's wrong and everybody's right, but yet we have practicalities involved in it. So on the one hand, these can be highly emotional circumstances. It's not true in this particular case, but Troxel was a combination of 4 different appeals that were consolidated, and one of them involved the saddest of all circumstances, a case where one of the parents of the children was killed. The remaining spouse remarried. That spouse then adopted the children. Well, in our legal system, we treat an adoption as absolutely identical as to natural birth of children. We don't differentiate, so now we have an intact family, parents who are fit parents and have the right to make decisions, and yet your heart has to go out to these grandchildren if they're deprived of access to their grandchildren. They've lost their child, and now they're being cut off from the living remnant, what's left with their child left behind, which is their grandchildren, and your heart has to go out to them, and yet the law has to make sometimes some very difficult choices in this, which, getting back to the Jewish story, is both sides are right, but they both can't be right. I'm hoping the Wisconsin Supreme Court accepts certification on this case for several reasons. One, from a selfish point of view, gives me something to talk about and something to write about in this field. And there's been precious little. Second, the Supreme Court has not accepted a family law case since the McCreath case, about 5-6 years ago at least, or something, on professional goodwill, and I'm not real comfortable with their decision in that case. And lastly, because I think it should be interesting in terms of the different arguments that are made and positions that are taken on this. So I hope the Supreme Court accepts review, and I'll follow up. So keep reading your monthly flu. If they do reject certification, I'll let you know. And then, of course, the Court of Appeals will make a decision. So either way, we should get some law out of this. And if the Supreme Court does accept the case, we'll follow up with you in terms of oral arguments and some of the arguments, and, of course, when they eventually reach a decision. There are a number of Wisconsin cases in this field already. And there's at least one case from Racine County that's sort of an outlier in the whole area, taking a position where I felt that the Court of Appeals did not follow the mandate of Troxel to the extent Troxel has a mandate. And for review of those cases, as well as any case in the family law field for at least the last 40 or 50 years, I hope you go to our Wisconsin Family Law Case Finder. We have opened it up for subscriptions, and it's something which we've been working on in this firm for many, many years, and something that I think will be very useful to family law practitioners, not only in the grandparent visitation area, but others as well.